Lâche-moi!
29 seconds. That is the total time it took for a dream anniversary trip to become an irreversible tragedy. On April 18, 2019, in the remote wilderness of the Moremi Game Reserve in Botswana, Claire Beaumont, a 36-year-old French administrator, was killed by a lioness. The entire event, from the final moments of calm to the fatal impact, was recorded by the GoPro camera clipped to her cap. The footage captured more than just the terrifying speed of the attack. It documented the critical miscalculation made in the pursuit of a photograph. It shows Claire deliberately leaving the safety of her vehicle and walking 39 feet into the open savanna, positioning herself just 43 feet from a lone lion cub. What the chaotic final frames don't fully reveal, however, is the precise sequence of seemingly small decisions made in the preceding 5 minutes, or the explicit warning from her husband that was tragically ignored just moments before the attack. Claire Beaumont was not a reckless thrill-seeker. She was a meticulous planner, an experienced world traveler who, alongside her husband Jean-Paul, had explored some of the planet's most beautiful and remote locations. This trip to Botswana was the culmination of a shared dream, a celebration of 15 years of marriage. Claire considered herself a collector of authentic moments, and her confidence in navigating natural environments was built upon years of travel and a deep respect for the wild. The fatal irony is that this very passion, the desire to capture a once-in-a-lifetime image of a lion cub, led her to momentarily set aside the fundamental rules of safety she knew so well. It was a single, understandable lapse in judgment that created the perfect conditions for disaster. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe these stories are important for understanding our relationship with the wild, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. To truly comprehend how this day went so terribly wrong, we must go back 12 hours, to the quiet dawn over the Okavango Delta, when Claire Beaumont woke up completely unaware that a lioness was resting, unseen, in the golden grass that would later become her final resting place. Claire Beaumont lived a life of deliberate contrasts, a quiet rebellion against the predictable rhythm of her work week. In her professional role as an administrator for an architectural firm in Lyon, she was known for her precision and her calm, methodical approach to complex projects. But this structured existence was merely the foundation that supported her true passion, exploring the untamed corners of the world with her husband Jean-Paul. She never called herself a photographer, a title she felt implied a technical ambition she didn't possess. Instead, she was a collector of authentic moments, driven to capture the raw essence of an experience rather than a perfectly composed image. This pursuit had cultivated a deep confidence in her ability to read and navigate natural landscapes, a confidence built on years of hiking and guided tours, but one that perhaps didn't fully account for the profound difference between a European park and the African savanna. This particular journey to Botswana was more than just another trip. It was the crowning achievement of a shared dream, a celebration of 15 years of marriage to Jean-Paul. Their relationship was forged in this mutual love for discovery, a partnership that found its greatest joy in planning and executing ambitious travels. They chose a self-guided safari in the Okavango Delta specifically to escape the curated, almost sterile experience of more structured tours. They sought an unfiltered connection with nature, the freedom to set their own pace and follow their own instincts. For Claire, this anniversary was meant to be the ultimate expression of that freedom, a chance to immerse herself completely in a landscape that operated on its own terms, far from the schedules and safety nets of organized tourism. It was a quest for an authenticity that, tragically, she would find in its most unforgiving form. The day of the tragedy, Thursday, April 18th, began with the serene beauty that had drawn them to Botswana in the first place. They woke at 6:30 a.m. to a clear sky and a gentle breeze that promised a day of comfortable warmth. By 8 a.m., after a light breakfast at their lodge, they were in their rented 4x4 venturing onto the less traveled secondary tracks of the Moremi Game Reserve. The mood was light, celebratory. Every animal sighting, from a herd of impas leaping through the grass to a solitary giraffe stripping leaves from an acacia, was met with shared delight. They were living the very moments they had spent years dreaming about. Two partners completely in their element, mapping their own adventure through one of the last great wildernesses on Earth. There was no schedule to keep, no guide to consult, only an open landscape and the promise of discovery around every bend. As was her habit on every trip, Claire meticulously documented her journey. Her primary tool was a GoPro Hero 7, a camera she had owned for 2 years and had become expert at using. It was attached via a magnetic clip to the brim of her cap, a simple, hands-free setup that allowed her to capture continuous video of her perspective while keeping her hands free for binoculars or simply to absorb the view. She wasn't creating content for an audience of strangers. She was building a visual diary, a collection of moving memories that she would later edit into films for her family and close friends. The camera was an extension of her experience, a way to relive the journey and share the feeling of being there. On that day, the small, unassuming device was performing its function perfectly, recording the peaceful savanna, the quiet conversations, and the growing sense of wonder, completely unaware it was also counting down the final hours of her life. Their journey took them deep into the heart of the Moremi Game Reserve, a protected wilderness sprawling over 1,900 square miles within the Okavango Delta. The landscape was a stunning mosaic of ecosystems, where seasonal floodplains gave way to dry savanna and dense woodlands. They were visiting at the end of the rainy season, a time of incredible vibrancy, when the vegetation was at its most lush and dense, a world of green and gold stretching to the horizon. This abundance, however, was deceptive. The very richness of the environment that made it so beautiful also made it dangerous, creating a landscape of infinite hiding places, where the line between predator and prey was constantly redrawn in the shifting grasses. It was a place that demanded respect, a place where the rules of the wild superseded the desires of its visitors. The specific area where their journey would end was a remote, seldom-used sand track flanked by flat, open terrain. The ground was covered in a mix of short grass, interspersed with thick patches of taller, golden-hued grass that stood about 31 inches high. Under the bright afternoon sun, visibility seemed excellent, yet this was a profound illusion. The color and height of the grass provided the perfect camouflage, a natural cloak of invisibility for the region's predators. A lioness, resting after a hunt or simply watching over her young, could lie down in this grass and vanish completely, becoming one with the landscape. She could be just feet away from the track, a silent, unseen presence, patiently observing the world from a position of absolute advantage, waiting for any disturbance to her domain. Moremi is world-renowned for its high concentration of large predators. Lions, leopards, spotted hyenas, and African wild dogs thrive in this environment. And while they are generally habituated to the sight and sound of safari vehicles, this familiarity is often misinterpreted by visitors as tameness. It is not. The animals tolerate the vehicles as large, noisy, and non-threatening parts of their environment. However, the moment a human shape breaks that familiar silhouette by stepping out of the vehicle, the dynamic changes instantly and irrevocably. Decades of park records show that attacks on humans are exceedingly rare, but they share a common thread. They are almost exclusively the result of a visitor violating the park's most fundamental safety protocols, a human error that transforms a passive observer into a perceived threat. The rules are simple, clear, and communicated repeatedly to every person who enters the reserve. They are printed on brochures, posted at entry gates, and verbally reinforced by lodge staff. The first and most critical rule is to never, under any circumstances, exit your vehicle except in designated fenced-off areas. The second is to maintain a respectful and safe distance from all wildlife, with a minimum of 164 feet strongly recommended for potentially dangerous animals like lions. Claire and John Paul had received this information multiple times. They had signed a waiver with the vehicle rental agency acknowledging they understood these rules. Claire, with her extensive travel background, was not ignorant of these principles. She knew them intellectually. The danger was not a lack of knowledge, but the insidious belief that for a special enough moment, the rules could be temporarily bent. This belief was fueled by a potent combination of her personality and the unique circumstances of the day. Her determination, a trait that served her so well in her professional and personal projects, became a liability in the wild. The intense desire to capture that one-of-a-kind, authentic moment, the very reason they had come to Botswana, created a powerful form of tunnel vision. The sight of a vulnerable lion cub, seemingly alone, presented an opportunity that felt too perfect to resist. In that critical moment, the abstract knowledge of the rules faded into the background, overshadowed by the powerful, tangible pull of the image she envisioned. Her confidence, born from years of safe travel, created a fatal blind spot, allowing her to rationalize a risk that a professional guide would have never even considered. The afternoon had been quiet, a slow and peaceful drive under the vast African sky. After a simple lunch at a designated picnic spot around 1 p.m., they had continued their exploration, the 4x4 kicking up a gentle trail of dust behind them. The heat of the day was beginning to soften, and the light was turning golden, the perfect conditions for photography. At approximately 3:25 p.m., as they rounded a slow bend in the sandy track, Claire saw it. There, just off the road, was a single lion cub, small and seemingly unoblivious to their presence as it playfully batting at a fallen stick. It was an image of pure, innocent wilderness, the exact kind of authentic moment she had traveled thousands of miles to find. She told Jean-Paul to stop the car, her voice filled with an excitement that gave no hint of the tragedy that was about to be set in motion. At 3:25 p.m., the 4x4 rolled to a gentle stop on the sandy track, its engine idling in the vast silence of the savanna. From her position in the passenger seat, Claire Beaumont was captivated. The lion cub, no more than 82 feet away, was the embodiment of the wild innocence she had traveled so far to witness. For several minutes, the scene was one of perfect tranquility. The only sounds were the soft click of her camera and the whisper of the afternoon breeze through the golden grass. Her GoPro, faithfully recording from the brim of her cap, captured the peaceful tableau. The focused expression on her face, the playful cub in the distance, and the endless blue sky above. In these initial moments, there was no hint of danger, only a profound sense of connection and the thrill of a rare, intimate sighting in the heart of the African wilderness. As the minutes passed, however, a familiar frustration began to surface. The angle from the vehicle was limiting, the window frame cutting into the composition she envisioned. She wanted a lower perspective, an eye-level shot that would capture the cub's vulnerability and place the viewer directly in the scene with it. This was the core of her philosophy as a collector of moments, to not just observe, but to feel and to convey that feeling. She lowered her camera, the image in her mind far more compelling than the one on her screen. The distance, which had initially seemed prudent, now felt like a barrier. The thought began to form, a dangerous whisper against the chorus of every safety briefing she had ever received. A better shot was just a few steps away, out in the open. At precisely 3:29 p.m., the thought became a spoken intention. "I'm going to get out for a much better shot," she announced, her voice calm but resolute. Inside the confined space of the vehicle, the words hung in the air with sudden, immense weight. Jean-Paul reacted instantly, his voice sharp with alarm as he reminded her of the explicit warnings they had been given. It was the most critical juncture, a clear and direct verbal warning from the person who knew her best. This was not an abstract rule from a brochure, but an immediate, desperate plea from her husband, who recognized the boundary they were about to cross. It was the first and most obvious danger sign, a final opportunity to reconsider, to choose safety over the fleeting allure of a photograph. Claire's response was a testament to the power of rationalization when faced with intense desire. "It's just a cub. It's alone," she reasoned, her focus locked on the small creature. "I'll be very quick. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." In her mind, she had assessed and minimized the risk. The absence of an adult lion seemed to confirm her assessment. The drive that had pushed her to succeed in her career and to explore the world was now blinding her to the deadly reality of her environment. Her confidence, built over years of travel in less perilous landscapes, created a fatal blind spot. She truly believed she could control the situation, that she could step outside the established rules for just a moment and return unharmed, clutching the perfect image she so desperately wanted. At 3:30 p.m., her decision was made. Ignoring Jean-Paul's continued protests, she quietly unlatched her door. The soft click was unnaturally loud in the quiet of the bush. She slid out of the vehicle, her movements slow and deliberate, as if to prove she was being cautious. But the moment her feet touched the ground, she irrevocably altered the dynamic. She was no longer part of the large, noisy, non-threatening shape of the 4x4. She was now a solitary, upright figure in the open savanna, a form that every predator in that ecosystem is genetically programmed to recognize. She had broken the single most important rule of safari, stepping out of the metal shell of safety and into a world where she was no longer an observer, but a potential participant in the ancient drama of survival. With her eyes fixed on her goal, Claire began to walk away from the vehicle. She moved with a sense of purpose, covering the 39 feet of open ground between the track and her chosen vantage point. This action closed her distance to the cub to a mere 43 feet, well within the critical zone. Her focus was so absolute that she was oblivious to everything else: the texture of the grass under her feet, the vastness of the landscape around her, the silent, unseen eyes that were now surely fixed upon her. The GoPro continued to record, its unblinking lens documenting her steady, determined advance. It was the final walk of her life, a short journey from a place of perceived safety to a position of maximum vulnerability, a path paved with the best of intentions. What Claire could not see, what she had fatally miscalculated, was that the cub was not alone. Lying perfectly still in a patch of tall golden grass, just 72 feet from her position, was its mother. She was a 7-year-old African lioness, a 308-pound predator in the absolute prime of her life. She was not hunting, she was resting, conserving energy while keeping a vigilant watch over her vulnerable offspring. Her behavior was not driven by aggression or malice, but by the most powerful instinct in nature: maternal protection. From her concealed position, she had observed the vehicle's arrival without concern. But the moment Claire stepped out and began her approach, the lioness's posture would have shifted from passive observation to intense, focused alertness. She was a silent guardian, a coiled spring of lethal power, waiting to see if this strange, approaching figure constituted a threat. The final, fatal trigger occurred at 3:30 p.m. and 11 seconds. To get the perfect eye-level shot, Claire crouched down. In the world of animal behavior, this single action was a catastrophic mistake. A tall, upright human is an unusual and often intimidating sight to a predator. But a crouching human, low to the ground and moving slowly, mimics the exact posture of a stalking carnivore. In that instant, in the mind of the lioness, Claire Beaumont transformed from a curious anomaly into a direct and imminent threat to her cub. Every protective instinct, honed over millions of years of evolution, screamed that an attack was underway. There was no more time for observation. The decision to neutralize the threat was not a choice, it was an instantaneous biological imperative. The lioness exploded from the grass with terrifying speed and silence. There was no warning roar, no growl to announce her charge. One moment she was invisible, the next she was a blur of muscle and tawny fur, covering the 72 feet that separated her in approximately 2.5 seconds. The final frames captured by the GoPro, just before it was knocked from Claire's cap, show nothing but this rapidly approaching shape, a golden wave of destruction. The sheer velocity was incomprehensible, leaving no time for Claire to react, to stand, to scream, or even to fully register what was happening. Her world, which moments before had been filled with the singular purpose of capturing a beautiful image, was about to be reduced to a single, violent point of impact. At 3:30 p.m. and 13 seconds, the lioness struck her from behind. The impact had the force of a small vehicle, throwing her violently forward, face down into the dirt. The initial contact was immediately followed by the first and fatal bite, delivered with surgical precision to the base of her skull and upper neck. The immense pressure of the lioness's jaws caused a massive and catastrophic cervical fracture, an injury that would have resulted in an almost instantaneous loss of consciousness. The attack was brutally efficient. From the moment of impact, Claire would have been unaware of what followed, her life extinguished in the very first second of the physical assault. The dream of capturing a perfect moment had ended in a collision of unimaginable force. At 3:30 p.m. and 13 seconds, the lioness struck her from behind. The impact had the force of a small vehicle, throwing her violently forward, face down into the dirt. The initial contact was immediately followed by the first and fatal bite, delivered with surgical precision to the base of her skull and upper neck. The immense pressure of the lioness's jaws caused a massive and catastrophic cervical fracture, an injury that would have resulted in an almost instantaneous loss of consciousness. The attack was brutally efficient. From the moment of impact, Claire would have been unaware of what followed, her life extinguished in the very first second of the physical assault. The dream of capturing a perfect moment had ended in a collision of unimaginable force. At 3:30 p.m. and 13 seconds, the lioness struck her from behind. The impact had the force of a small vehicle, throwing her violently forward, face down into the dirt. The initial contact was immediately followed by the first and fatal bite, delivered with surgical precision to the base of her skull and upper neck. The immense pressure of the lioness's jaws caused a massive and catastrophic cervical fracture, an injury that would have resulted in an almost instantaneous loss of consciousness. The attack was brutally efficient. From the moment of impact, Claire would have been unaware of what followed, her life extinguished in the very first second of the physical assault. The dream of capturing a perfect moment had ended in a collision of unimaginable force. At 3:30 p.m. and 13 seconds, the lioness struck her from behind. The impact had the force of a small vehicle, throwing her violently forward, face down into the dirt. The initial contact was immediately followed by the first and fatal bite, delivered with surgical precision to the base of her skull and upper neck. The immense pressure of the lioness's jaws caused a massive and catastrophic cervical fracture, an injury that would have resulted in an almost instantaneous loss of consciousness. The attack was brutally efficient. From the moment of impact, Claire would have been unaware of what followed, her life extinguished in the very first second of the physical assault. The dream of capturing a perfect moment had ended in a collision of unimaginable force. After the initial fatal bite, the lioness did not immediately relent. Driven by instinct, she inflicted multiple deep puncture wounds to Claire's neck and shoulders. These subsequent bites severed the vertebral artery, leading to a massive and uncontrollable hemorrhage that would have made survival impossible even if the initial neck injury had not been fatal. The violence was swift, targeted, and overwhelming. While Claire was beyond suffering, the scene was one of primal ferocity, a stark and brutal illustration of the power differential between a human and a top predator defending its young. It was a defensive attack executed with the lethal efficiency of a hunt. From inside the 4x4, a mere 39 feet away, John Paul was a helpless witness to the unfolding horror. His immediate shock gave way to a desperate, frantic attempt to intervene. He began screaming, his voice raw with terror and grief, while simultaneously laying on the vehicle's horn, creating a continuous blaring noise that shattered the savannah's peace. This was the only weapon he had. He knew he couldn't get out, that to do so would be to share his wife's fate. His actions were born of pure instinct, a desperate attempt to distract the animal, to break its focus, to do anything that might stop the unrelenting assault on the woman he loved. The ceaseless loud noise from the vehicle eventually had an effect. The Lioness, likely disturbed by the persistent and unnatural sound, finally broke off her attack. She seized Claire's body in her jaws and dragged her approximately 20 feet further into the grass, a final instinctual act of securing her kill away from the source of the disturbance. Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she released her and trotted back towards her cub, melting back into the landscape. The blare of the horn gave way to an abrupt, deafening silence. The attack was over. The savannah was still once more, bearing silent witness to the tragedy that had just transpired in less than half a minute. In the aftermath of the lioness's retreat, the world stood still. Claire Beaumont lay motionless on the ground, the extent of her injuries starkly visible even from a distance. The serene afternoon had been irrevocably shattered. For a few agonizing seconds, John Paul sat frozen, the horrific scene replaying in his mind. Then his training and survival instinct took over. His hands trembling, he reached for the vehicle's emergency radio, his mind racing to formulate the call for help. He was alone, deep in the African bush, with his wife's body lying in the grass just feet away. The attack had ended, but his ordeal, and the long, desperate wait for a rescue he knew would come too late, was only just beginning. At 3:31 p.m., Jean-Paul's desperate radio call for help crackled through the ranger station's receiver, a voice strained with a terror that required no translation. The remote location of the incident meant that help was not close. A medical rescue helicopter was dispatched immediately, but the vastness of the Okavango Delta imposed its own unforgiving timeline. For 41 agonizing minutes, Jean-Paul could do nothing but wait, trapped in his vehicle, the silence of the savannah now a suffocating presence. The helicopter finally appeared as a speck in the sky, touching down at a safe distance at 4:12 p.m. A team of paramedics disembarked, their movements cautious and deliberate as they scanned the tall grass, acutely aware that the lioness and her cub were likely still nearby, before making their careful approach to Claire. Upon reaching her, the paramedics' assessment was tragically swift. The scene told a story of overwhelming and unsurvivable force. Claire Beaumont showed no signs of life. There was no pulse, no respiration. The trauma to her head and neck was catastrophic and visibly incompatible with life. Following official protocols for such clear circumstances, no resuscitation efforts were attempted, as any such action would have been futile. The paramedics' role shifted from rescue to recovery. After performing the necessary checks and documenting their findings, they made the official declaration. At 4:18 p.m., just 48 minutes after she had stepped out of the vehicle to capture a photograph, Claire Beaumont was pronounced dead at the scene, her anniversary celebration having ended on the very savannah floor she had so longed to experience. The Botswana Department of Wildlife and National Parks immediately took charge of the investigation. Rangers secured the perimeter, a difficult task in such an open and wild environment. They conducted a gentle but necessary interview with a deeply traumatized John Paul, piecing together the timeline of the afternoon's events. The most critical piece of evidence, however, was recovered from the grass not far from where Claire lay: the small GoPro camera. Its magnetic clip had been torn from her cap during the force of the impact. This device, purchased 2 years earlier to document joyful adventures and collect authentic moments, now held the objective, unblinking truth of a tragedy. Its memory card contained the final, crucial seconds that would explain exactly how this day had gone so terribly wrong. The analysis of the footage left no room for ambiguity. The short recording corroborated Jean Paul's account perfectly, showing Claire's deliberate walk away from the vehicle and her final, fatal decision to crouch down. The investigation's conclusion was therefore clear and unavoidable. The incident was the direct result of human error. Claire had violated the park's most critical safety protocol, and her proximity and posture had been misinterpreted by the Lioness as a direct threat to its cub. The official report classified the attack not as a predatory act, but as a defensive maternal response, a behavior that was entirely natural, predictable, and, under the circumstances she had created, tragically inevitable. The responsibility was placed solely on the decision to leave the safety of the vehicle. This conclusion directly informed the fate of the Lioness. Because her behavior was deemed a natural reaction to a perceived threat, authorities made the decision that no action would be taken against her. She was not considered a problem animal or one that had developed an unnatural aggression towards humans. She was simply a wild mother acting on millions of years of instinct. No attempt was made to track, capture, or euthanize her or the cub. This decision reflects a core philosophy of conservation in Botswana's wild spaces. The animals are not punished for being animals. The onus of safety and the consequences of ignoring established rules rest entirely with the human visitors who choose to enter their world. The Lioness was left to raise her cub in peace. The news of Claire's death sent a shockwave of grief back to her family and friends in Lyon. After navigating the difficult diplomatic and logistical channels, Jean Paul returned to France with his wife's body. In the midst of their profound loss, the Beaumont family issued a single public statement. They asked for privacy, but also included a poignant and powerful plea, urging all future travelers to always respect the power and the rules of nature. It was a message of incredible grace, turning their private anguish into a public service, a warning born from the worst moment of their lives. They did not seek to place blame on the park or the animal, but instead to honor Claire's memory by reinforcing the very lesson her death so tragically taught. The incident garnered significant international media coverage, serving as a stark and widely circulated cautionary tale. It moved beyond the typical news cycle, sparking conversations on travel forums and in photography communities about the growing pressure to capture the perfect, unique shot in the wild. Claire's story became a symbol of the dangerous line between admiration and intrusion, highlighting how the desire to get closer, fueled by a confidence in one's own judgment, can lead to a catastrophic underestimation of risk. The tragedy forced a global re-examination of responsible tourism, reminding a wide audience that the subjects of our wildlife photos are not performers, but powerful, unpredictable animals in their own domain. In the wake of the tragedy, concrete changes were implemented on the ground in Botswana. Several prominent safari companies and 4x4 rental agencies in the Okavango region revised their safety briefings. They began to incorporate the anonymized details of Claire's story as a specific case study. The narrative of an experienced, passionate traveler making a single fatal miscalculation proved to be far more resonant than a simple list of regulations. It was a powerful tool to cut through the sense of invincibility that can sometimes accompany adventure travel. By making the consequences of a simple decision so vividly clear, they hoped to prevent other visitors from believing, even for a moment, that the rules did not apply to them. The GoPro footage was never released to the public, a decision made out of deep respect for Claire and her family. However, with their permission, it found a powerful purpose behind the scenes. The video became an essential component in advanced training programs for safari guides and park rangers throughout southern Africa. It served as a visceral, real-world example of how quickly a peaceful sighting can escalate into a fatal encounter. Beyond this official use, Jean-Paul honored his wife's memory in a deeply personal way. He established a small educational fund in her name, collaborating with a conservation group to finance brochures and videos on responsible wildlife viewing, ensuring that Claire's passion for authentic moments would live on by helping others experience them safely. In the end, the small camera on Claire Beaumont's cap did exactly what she intended. It captured an authentic moment. It was not the moment she wanted, but it was a moment of unvarnished truth about the unwritten contract between humanity and the wild. Her story is not one of recklessness, but of a passion that momentarily eclipsed caution. Her legacy is a solemn reminder that the wild does not negotiate its terms. If this story has offered you a deeper understanding of that truth, please consider liking this video to help share its important message. The footage recorded a tragedy, but her memory serves as a timeless warning written in the golden grass of the savannah. The most profound connection with nature is found not in how close we can get, but in the respectful distance we choose to keep.